Hello everybody, we're here at RemoteCon with yet another very interesting product demo on remote work tools. Here with us now we have Loop Team, a virtual office for distributed teams. Loop Team is a virtual office that brings the best parts of an office environment to distributed teams in order to help them communicate faster and more effectively, capture and disseminate face-to-face discussions in an asynchronous way, and stay more connected than ever. It was founded in 2018 in California, USA by a team of 3 former entrepreneurs. Raj Singh, the CEO, has been an expert on effective and competitive remote work before it was the popular choice. One of the companies he previously founded, Tempo AI, was later acquired by Salesforce, and it was a smart calendar that was inspired by the pain points and experience of a founder with a lot of meetings. For our demo here today, we have Raj. Very nice to have you here. So Raj, you have already experienced in your previous company the efficiency of meetings and face-to-face interactions. Can you please tell us how you translated that in Loop Team?
Yeah. So some background here. So as you mentioned, my last company, Tempo AI, was acquired by Salesforce, and Salesforce is a very quote-unquote remote-friendly sort of company. They have offices all over the world, but obviously the definition of remote has become quite overloaded. But we had teammates that were full-time working from home. And, after I had left Salesforce, I would check in with them and said, how are things going? What was very interesting, there was sort of feedback that, hey, I feel a little bit more disconnected. I'm like, what do you mean by that? They're like, well, when we were at Tempo, we had an office water cooler. We had this always on video sort of thing. I could see what's going on. I can communicate. But here at Salesforce, I'm having to fly back to some corporate office every 4 weeks to sort of feel connected. And so that was kind of where this sort of started. The genesis of Loop Team was, how can I make a distributed team feel more connected? So then what we did was, and I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. But then what we did was we then went and spoke to 100 sort of plus individuals who work full-time remote. And we kind of segmented that. We started with people who were full-time remote members of teams where they were partially distributed. So they were a full-time remote team member, but the company had a headquarters or an office. And then full-time remote team members as part of fully distributed teams. And obviously, as you can imagine, post-COVID pandemic, everybody's sort of fully distributed right now. And so you're kind of going to the other side of the pendulum. But what was interesting was in talking with these different folks, the feedback that had come was pretty consistent. It was, I'm feeling a little bit disconnected if there was an office from sort of the mothership. I'm not able to see my teammates enough. Although we're working and we're communicating on Slack, I just miss out on some of the social interactions or social conversations or the ping pong room or whatever it is. I don't even know some of my teammates because I just don't, they're in a different team and I don't bump into them anymore. I feel like there's discussions happening, but I don't actually know. And so I feel like I'm just out of the loop just because I'm not there, or I'm just not in every sort of discussion. And I just don't really have a sense of who's actually around. I know I can go and check my Slack and see, oh, somebody has a green dot next to them, but are they really there? Is this a good time to chat or whatnot? So we kind of distilled a lot of these sort of things, amongst other things like loneliness and whatnot, into sort of a list. And what we realized was a lot of the interactions and things that were identified that people were missing were really things that you experience when you're physically in an office. So sort of office IRL that's sort of missing in a virtual sense. And so where we started was we wanted to build a tool that could bring some of the better things of a physical office environment into distributed work. And so this was when and sort of where Loop Team was founded or born on. And so what you're seeing here, and I'm going to caveat all this, it is 7 a.m.-ish in the Bay Area. And so most of my team is actually asleep, and we're kind of distributed, but we're not so globally distributed. And so you only see Brad sort of here online. But the first thing you'll notice if I show my offline users, and there's some dummy users in here because we're always using internal for testing, but you'll see that the team's actually organized by time zone. And so you can kind of get a sense of where people are. And we found this was just a good first step, like just where are people? Just so you can get some empathy, like, hey, you're working and it's like, I need to talk to so-and-so, and you don't realize it's like 8 p.m. in their time, and they're probably kind of tired. They just had a long day, and it's probably, maybe I should wait till the next day or whatever it might be. So we kind of started with that mindset, organize your team by time zone. Then the next thing you'll notice is, besides a person here, sort of Brad, you'll see that there's a status that's shown. In this case, it says in a document. For me, it says in Loop Team. We call that automatic status. And what it's doing is it's trying to identify what is the activity that the user is currently doing, not from the perspective of trying to be a big brother or be privacy invasive. All of this actually runs on the computer and we don't see any of this. But it's looking specifically at business apps. And the goal here is to try to figure out, is this person in a state that maybe I can communicate with? Like, is the person totally in flow? Like, I don't want to disrupt them or interrupt them. But Brad right now has been task switching between a document and organizing tasks, which I just saw earlier. He seems like he's probably in a good state. If I want to like shoulder tap him and talk to Brad right now, I could. And he probably wouldn't be bothered. It's like, probably makes sense. In other instances, sometimes there's a Slack discussion in the morning and you were talking to somebody. It's like, hey, we need to review these slides later today. And then later today, you have Loop Team sort of parked here and you see that Brad's in a slide. Oh, look at that. That's just a coincidence. And you're like, oh, he's probably working on that thing we were talking about earlier today. Now is probably a great time for me to drop in on. So what you can then do is you can click on Brad. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Brad. And now I've dropped it on Brad. And the first thing you'll notice is that interaction was super fast. So I just click on him and within a second, I'm in communication with Brad. So we're trying to recreate some of that office shoulder tap kind of experience. When you're in an open workspace, you want to shoulder tap somebody, you can tap the person next to you and say, hey, I have a quick question, or I just want to ask. And this is your normal sort of conferencing view within Loop Team, and it's intentionally small. You can turn on video if you like. And obviously, it's always a little weird with video inside of a video because we're already in a conference right now. But this is sort of your normal sort of conferencing view. And the reason it's intentionally small is because a lot of the interactions within Loop Team are really around work. It's between your very formal meetings. It's when a group of developers or a group of product managers or designers or accountants or whatever are hyper collaborating. It's what we like to say is when the real work gets done. And they want to have quick communication. And so a lot of times the emphasis or focus is really around the screen share. But you can certainly expand and contract and do all sort of the normal things that you might expect. But what you'll notice is on this side, you'll see that Brad and Raj are in a conversation. And so you can actually see this appear right there. And so the team can actually see that the two of us are having a discussion. So just like in a physical office, when you walk down the hallway, and you can see who are the different folks that are maybe discussing during the day, you get that same kind of vibe in a virtual environment. And one of the things that we have found that's very helpful with is it addresses some of the sense of loneliness, because you can kind of see the different activities that are happening across your team, but it also gives you more awareness as to what people are doing and who might actually be around, who's actually available right now, who's not available, and so forth. And so then from here, I can actually just, maybe I want to jump into a room. I can, here's the stand-up room. I can just click, and now within a second, I'm in the stand-up room. And so now again, the team here, I'm just going to go ahead and start screen share here because I want to show you something in a second. So I'm doing a screen share instead of a screen share, so it might get a little crazy. But here, you can see that it says Raj is in daily stand-up. And so now again, just like when Brad and I were communicating, the team can actually see that I'm in the stand-up room. And we've seen some interesting behaviors here. We've seen team members pile into rooms, like they'll create rooms like a water cooler room. Sometimes they'll, if they use it for an actual recurring like small group meeting, we'll see meetings actually start more on time, which is an interesting effect because they can kind of see who's in the room already. And they're like, oh, okay, maybe it's time to jump in because Jane from my design team has finally arrived and she's running this discussion. And so that's all been sort of interesting, just sort of that behavior. But the other aspect here is you'll see we have this record button. And really what this is intended to do is, do I want to share this sort of discussion, with my distributed team that maybe couldn't attend or is not around or whatnot. And when this button is on, And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is sort of tight groups, tight workspaces, not necessarily small teams, could be large companies, but small groups that hyper collaborate, open and transparent. When this record button is sort of on, you can kind of get a sense of what's going on. So I can actually hover over daily stand-up and you can see the what's being talked about in real time. We're talking about effect and behaviors and what's being screen shared. So my team can actually see what are the different things that are being talked about within the team. This is certainly the user can control it and turn it off and whatnot. But the idea here is when you're physically in an office, and people talk about this a lot, the serendipitous nature of discussion. Like you can kind of hear a background conversation, or they call it chance discussions, the term that Fred Wilson uses. But the notion that you hear these other things going on, you're like, oh, that's an interesting topic. I want to jump into that. Or, oh, they're discussing pricing and that's relevant to what I do and I should maybe jump into that. Or maybe I don't even know this team, but you know what? It's interesting for me to just get additional context of things that they might be talking about or whatever it might be. And so we part of the effort here is to try to recreate some of that feeling of being sort of in a physical office. You can kind of follow these sort of background conversations and see what people are talking about. Of course, the user can control it. So I'll go ahead and close that. So then after the meeting, I can then choose whether I want to publish that meeting to my workspace. And again, where we've seen success across the various sorts of teams that use Loop Team, these are small, tight-knit groups that are hyper-sharing, very open, very transparent. They probably previously, pre-COVID environment, worked in a pretty open office, or they worked in a distributed setup where they were always sort of always on or always sharing. You know, it was kind of that kind of model. And so if I publish the conversation here on the right side, we actually have a feed. And you can kind of see what sort of discussions have been published by different team members. Now, if I scroll down here, there's some discussions like, for example, this stand-up meeting. I didn't attend this meeting. So maybe I'm curious what was talked about. So I can kind of get a sense of, oh, okay, they talked about meeting stats. Okay, that's interesting because that gives me context. They talked about pagination, and I actually know what this means because there was a discussion like 2 weeks ago about scrolling and how we need to paginate this. And so this is the whole sort of idea. It gives you this additional context and gives you a sense of what's happened and what you missed. And I can kind of get a sense of screen shares, like what was shared. And so that gives me additional context. And again, you may have a team member in Dubai who misses a chunk of discussions. You may have team members that are local, but the discussions aren't directly relevant, but maybe they want to get some of that context. And so this sort of feed of what's happening that you can kind of scroll through helps with a lot of that. So that's sort of the high-level summary of what we do at Loop Team, really trying to bring a lot of the benefits of Office IRL, but into a virtual setup.
Thank you, Raj, very much for the presentation. I was wondering, there are some tools that are doing similar things out there. How do you differentiate against, let's say, other competitors?
Yeah, so a big thing for Loop Team was making sure AI was a key part of the experience. So we've seen some virtual office experiences that are just simply focused on just making the shoulder tap really fast, if you just want to sort of communicate. But for us, it was, how can we take that a step further and provide a truer form of office sort of IRL and benefit? And so there's a few different areas where we bring in AI into our experience. And part of this is because of our genesis. So our roots was SRI, which is Stanford Research Institute, which is where the team sort of was accelerated. So the first thing that we do, and I didn't actually show it to you, is we do predictive status. So we try to estimate when you might be back online. You can go into Slack and you can set your status manually if that's the sort of team culture, but it gets very cumbersome. And just because you set your status as like, I'm out getting cupcakes, you have no idea when so-and-so is coming back. And so we're trying to predict based on time zones and based on historical when somebody might be around or available again. And this is, again, very helpful from the context of distributed and availability. The second thing we do, which is what I was showing you earlier, is we do provide a true sense of what's actually being talked about. And so you can kind of see the different discussions. And I don't know if you saw that, but we were actually summarizing keywords of what's being talked about, like topics, not just simply like, hey, here's a running flow of transcript. And we have found this among some of our customers to result in very interesting interactions where they may have team members, they're having a discussion, And because they have a sense of what's being discussed, they have a just better context. And so when they go into their next discussion, they feel just, even if it's 2% more slightly prepared, it makes a difference. The third thing that we do that I only briefly showed you, I didn't go into full depth with what that feed looks like, is in addition to sort of showing you here's some of the meetings and discussions you missed, we actually pull out audio highlights. And so you can quickly roll over and basically, if you just listen to these 5 different 10-second audio clips of this meeting, we feel that you would have a full, almost a full understanding of what that meeting was about. And so it gives you this sort of like in a quick minute, you have an audio summary of what this whole discussion was about that you missed. And so this is where we're trying to bring in AI to create a more complete virtual office experience, just from the perspective of background conversations, as well as what you missed, for those distributed team members that are in different time zones.
Thank you very much, Raj. It was very interesting. Thank you very much, guys, for watching. Remote teams are no longer a myth, but a clear reality. Whether you're just working from home in the same city or working in a distributed teams on multiple time zones, communication and collaboration will always be the key to your company's success. Make sure you use the proper tools in order to achieve that success. Check out RemoteCon in order to find out more information about Loop Team and join the conference for more infos on remote work tools. Thank you.